Hey, Levelin Up Nation. It is your host, Brigham Blackham. I'm your success story strategist.
I want you to deliver the presentation precisely the way you would deliver to an audience. And at some point, something's going to happen. And that forces sort of the anticipation already. I want them artificially nervous. You know what? Your experience is totally right. I'm validating you. But you know what? Every hurricane is different. And it just helps them to get control back, because that's the goal I make with speakers. I say, I need to keep you in control. And keep you a professional no matter what's going on around you. That's not only my job as a disaster trainer, but it's my job as a coach.
Hey, Levelin Up Nation. It is your host, Brigham Blackham. I'm your success story strategist. We have a very unique topic today. I'm so grateful for Patrick Hardy to be here today. He is a disaster prevention specialist. I don't know the best way to describe him other than he knows how to help people think clearly in really difficult situations, put in the right plans, and make sure that they can act accordingly so they don't have horrible things happen. And we're going to talk about some of the scenarios, some of the challenges that you may face as a speaker, and the way that you could potentially turn this difficulty into a triumph. And I'm so excited to have Patrick on. He is honestly a world-renowned speaker because he has been able to talk on so many different stages. He's very dynamic. Really excited to have you on today. So Patrick, welcome to the call. How are you doing today?
Brigham, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm glad to be here today. So I'm really excited about this conversation. I think it's gonna be really fun.
Absolutely. Well, let's start here. I know that you've got a diverse background when it comes to disaster remediation. I don't know the best way to say it. How would you describe what you do and give us like a little inkling of why it's so important for people to understand that emergency preparedness is key in their profession?
Well, yeah, I'm a disaster preparedness expert. So what I do is I work with families, I work with small businesses, I work with high net worth clients. I've been a consultant with Fortune 500 businesses. So I've been contracted to the government. So I've done a lot of different work at both the state and federal levels. I've also done work with the locals and nonprofits. I've sort of done a lot of different things. And one of the things I really find interesting is how you have to tailor the kind of disaster preparedness that you're doing to each one of these industries. So it is really important, because one of the things I say to people is I say, if it matters to you, that, whatever the processes is, if you're a business or if it's with your family, making sure that your possessions and your family and your pets and everybody are taken care of, then that's one of the reasons why disaster planning should be done. And I don't do the doom and gloom message. I say to people, I'm here to empower you. And that's really what great preparedness does, is it empowers you to be put into a situation where if you happen to have a disaster, you have a wildfire, you have an earthquake, you have a hurricane, you are not at the mercy of the events, that you have options in place. There's a methodology that I utilize with all my clients. I've worked with hundreds of thousands of clients all over the world. And there's like a way and a method that I've developed that really ensures that you maintain that control regardless of the chaos that's going on around you.
Wonderful. Maintaining control in chaos. That seems like a tall order. So I'm excited to hear how you apply that to the speaking industry, to people that want to monetize their message. Let's start in with some of the scenarios that people may already know about, but will happen to you at some time as a speaker. Something with the technology is not going to work. Your mic, your background, as far as your slides, they're going to die. Something technological is not going to function. Let's talk about what are some of the ways that you've been able to help people prepare themselves mentally and even physically to make sure that they can overcome some simple challenges like that. And then we'll get into the deep, dark ones later.
Oh yeah, sure. And I've actually trained speakers before where I've given them a scenario where I'll have them present to me, and I'll have them present their particularly the one that they sell the most. So the keynote that they sell the most. And the reason why I do that is because what happens to presenters far too often, and I've taught and I've won the national championships at multiple levels, high school, college, adult. And when I train people at those levels, I do this. I say, I want you to deliver the presentation precisely the way you would deliver to an audience. And at some point, something's going to happen. And that forces sort of the anticipation already. I want them artificially nervous. No real audience here. So I have to create an artificial fear of it. And then in the middle of it, I'll stop and I'll say, I know you're so used to a cadence and so used to a way of the presentation to be working. But when things don't work and things are not working the way they're supposed to, then you have to be prepared to adapt to it. And in fact, you can actually turn it to your advantage. I do this a lot with speakers, is that I'll have a piece of the technology go off, and it's amazing to see how presenters will stop and they'll start to look around and wait for the moderator to do something. And I would say, don't do that. I mean, I said, look at the audience in advance and determine, first of all, can you go without it? And you should be able to go without it. So, and there are things also that I emphasize that we'll talk about today, but particularly when you have minor things going on like technology and things, there's ways to actually make humor out of it. So you have to be prepared. And there's, as I said, it's too much for me to be able to sort of, distill down into a couple minutes here, but there are things that specifically that you can do. So I'll give an example. I tend to like lavaliers. Those are the of when I present, I don't ever use hand mics. I hate hand mics. I think it's stupid, and I can't stand using them. And I don't stand at lecterns. I never do that. I've told everyone. The only time I had to do it was when I was working for. I was being contracted by the federal government, and I had to speak at a federal government conference. And when I walked away the lectern, a member of the Secret Service said, "You have to remain behind the lectern for." And because there were dignitaries in the room, we had ambassadors. We had, I think the Secretary of the Treasury was in the room, and he said, he was very respectful, but he said, you need to return to the lectern because you're moving around is making the bodyguards nervous, because usually people don't do that. So do I have to be prepared to stand up and do that? Absolutely, because I'm an effusive, dramatic presenter. That's my style. And so I like to move around. When I see didactic presenters who are used to being at lecterns, then they have difficulty in more asymmetric types of speaking situations where you have to move around or engage audiences, or if you deal with dead fish audiences and you're in a position where you're used to being on stage. When you have dead fish audiences, get off the stage, get in front of the audience and start talking to them, because that's what matters. And so, but what ends up happening is that you have to adapt these things. So for me, like if I have to have a hand mic, I have a way of holding the mic. I'm used to doing that. And I tell all presenters, be used to using a microphone or using something that you're not used to doing. That is going to put you in a better position, because if it ever happens, the lavalier goes out for some reason, and they have to hand you a hand mic, you can immediately continue speaking, and you don't make a big deal out of it.
That's a great point. You have to be prepared, and the more prepared you are for those contingencies, the easier it is for you to respond in a way that is helpful for your message, and it doesn't become distracting.
Yeah, and I carry a lavalier with me. Actually, I carry one that I that is custom, that one that I really like, and I've even calibrated it. And when I do my AV test the day before, so for those of you who are hearing this, if you are a presenter, I don't care if you're getting paid 2,000 to present, 20,000 or 200,000. So you're in like the Daniel Pink or Brene Brown area, and or Hillary Clinton, who all command, they command 200,000 a speech. You should need to do an AV test. It is imperative that you go the night before, and don't just go up there. I wish we could really talk about this far more, because there's so many things you can do. Like I tell people, don't just walk up and go, test 1, 2, 3, test 1, 2, 3. No. I tell that, no, don't do that. I go, you need to launch into your presentation as you would normally. So for example, I warn the AV people, because when I present, the first thing I do as soon as I start talking is I launch into a story. I don't introduce myself. I don't say good morning. I don't do any of those things. I hate that stuff. I don't do it. It's not my style. I walk up and I launch into a story. And I have this story about Daniel Boone sometimes I tell, and I just immediately go into it. Or David Crockett. I mean, there's like stories I tell that will force me to modulate my voice. And therefore the AV people can adapt to that, because I warn them in advance. Get ready, because I'm like a guy like on a track block. Like as soon as the starting gun goes, I'm rolling. That's it. Yeah, exactly. Things are happening. So, and then I told them in the middle, I modulate and I'm more pianissimo, and then I go back to a crescendo at the end. That helps the AV people to go, okay, got it. This guy's gonna be talking for 40 minutes. I need to be prepared at this point, and this point. And then that kind of helps them to do it, because you don't want the sound to blow anybody's ears out. But that's why you do the AV test. If things are not working, you have backups.
Right. You want to make sure you're ringing out the room so that there's not feedback. You want to make sure that you know exactly where your space that you can actually go with the monitors and your spacing. So that's very helpful feedback, making sure that you know that your stuff is actually working, your equipment. Let's go here. I know that sometimes you'll have hecklers. You'll have people that are not the best audience members. You gave an example of a fish. What was the fish audience? You said a cold fish
They
with
I
dead,
call them a dead.
a dead fish.
Yeah, they're called dead fish
Great.
audiences.
I
Yeah,
think of like a dead fish hand when like a handshake. Okay, it's not responsive at all. Excellent.
that. Yep.
That's the idea. How do you deal with some of those, let's say, less than desirable audiences? Or it's not even usually a whole audience. It's like a few people in an audience that are just super standoffish or just not even kind of engaged.
2006, I was speaking at the Balboa Country Club. I'm sorry, the Balboa Yacht Club. And so I was talking about Hurricane Katrina because I'd just gotten back from Hurricane Katrina. I'd taken a year in Louisiana, and I came back and I was talking to people. And when I was doing that, I was talking about how well Walmart had responded and how they responded better to Hurricane Katrina than anyone. And it's really true. I mean, looking after 20 years of research, I can tell you that it all backs this up. But at the time, it was a very controversial position, but they'd asked me to talk about it. And so I said, okay. And there was a heckler in the room. There was, and when I say heckler, like I'm not exaggerating or being hyperbolic, there was somebody who was saying, you are wrong. You are flat wrong. You are completely wrong. The government was put in an impossible position, this and that. Walmart was not better than the government. I was in the Marine Corps for 25 years. I know the logistics. I know that Walmart was not as good. Okay, so how do you handle that? Well, the first thing I do is I prepare, just like in any disaster preparedness. I make it very clear to a venue and to the event that it's usually the MC or to the event organizer, but I make sure I always touch the MC, not physically, I mean, in a metaphorical sense. I always touch them and say, hey, listen, you need to be aware that if something is going on in the room and you have somebody who starts heckling me, like you need to speak to that person. But the way I handle it on stage is if somebody does that, what'll happen is that the MC will say, no, hold on a minute, let him talk. And okay, now that tones the room down a little bit. Now we've de-escalated. Now I'll address what he says. So what'll happen is that this is how it'll go. And this is how it went. So he yells about the government was better than Walmart, all this. And then the MC says, no, let him talk. And I'll say, you know what? But I'm glad you brought that up. Because there are things the government did really well. They did this really well. They did these things really well. But there's other things that maybe they didn't perform as well. While private corporations had continuity plans that were in place for this. And we can't ask the government to be perfect because they do this thing with the logistics, but they don't do these things. Where Walmart does logistics every day. They transport billions of dollars of merchandise from A to B. Of course, they're going to be better, but I'm not taking it away from the government. And I actually point, just like I'm doing right now. I'll actually look at the person, not with a pointed finger, with an open hand. Exactly. And so I do that as a metaphorical way of saying, I'm bringing you back into it. I don't use this body language. I don't cross your arms.
It closes you off for sure.
I've seen presenters do that before. I had a presenter who was doing a sales presentation, and the sales presenter was getting into an argument with someone in the audience because he was talking about closing. And if you guys are salesmen, the close is always the most controversial. There doesn't seem to be universal agreement on how to do a sales close. And he was saying, I do a sales close like this. And then they were yelling at each other. I mean, it was really, and I was trying to calm down, relax, you know what I mean? Because we're not curing cancer. We're just moving away with widgets. We're moving away widgets. That's it. And so, but there's a way of doing that where I try to be inclusive so I don't make anyone lose face, because you know what'll happen. You and I both know this. If you've been on stage long enough, they'll retaliate at the end of the presentation. They'll ask a question that puts you in an impossible spot. That's all they'll be doing for the rest of the presentation. And everyone else at the table will also start feeling the poison, and that could actually poison the room. I've seen that happen before. So tone it down, but then also bring them back into the conversation, both through your body language as well as through the way that you are actually speaking. So you actually answer the question, not in the way they wanted to, because they're just trying to engage you. One other story, Brigham, and then we'll hop on to something else.
Yeah, no worries.
I was at a presentation, and here's something you need to be aware of early on. If the audience is starting to be hostile early, you need to be aware of that. And if the MC is not holding what's going on under control, they're not keeping the audience under control, then you need to know that early on. And you know what? you need to cut the presentation short. I was speaking on the central coast of California. I was speaking at a Rotary Club. So I wasn't getting any money. Like I was at a Rotary Club, and I got heckled so bad, and people were yelling and screaming, and someone threw a bottle that I just literally, I was planning to go another 20 minutes because they scheduled me for 40 minutes. So I was actually going to speak for 40. I was at about 17, 18 minute mark. And I literally I didn't even move to the next slide because I block my slides out into portions so that I literally, if something like this happens, I can just end it and say, you know what, guys, that's it. It's all, blah, blah, blah. And then I turned back to my original story and I ended early and I pulled out my thing and I left. Because what's the point of that? I mean, why am I going to get into a confrontation with an audience? I mean, this isn't the 15th century where we're like, engaging each other in sword fights over, little picayune issues. I mean, it's just, but people do that. They get really their buck. And I don't talk about politics. I talked about that one time about Walmart because they asked me to talk about it. But other than that, I don't discuss politics. I talk about disaster planning. But there'll be people in the audience who say, I've been through, like for me, they'll say, I've been through a hurricane, Patrick, you're wrong. And the way I respond to them is they say, you know what, your experience is totally right. I'm validating you. But you know what? Every hurricane is different. Every single one is different. So maybe my experience is different than yours. That's just my experience. That helps tone it down. It's not perfect, but it does tone it down, and it gives you guys a leave to, keep going and to win the audience back.
A gestalt way to do this. You're saying, I am just sharing my experience. And then when you're getting insight from other people, you don't have to say that you agree with it. A lot of times the things that they say may be completely off and not even close to the right topic. So acknowledge them. I thought you did a great job there, acknowledging that, yes, there was something said. Let's address that and then move on with the topic at hand. There's a really interesting experience that I had a few years ago. There was an emergency preparedness event, and they even said, hey, if you get queasy, please don't look at these pictures. And they talked about basically packing a wound of a gunshot, and they had pictures of real people having that. And right before they did that, they had the warning caution thing, and we still had someone in the audience literally pass out from seeing the blood.
Oh yeah.
And it was interesting to see how the teachers came together and had that young lady come to, and I was actually just a few rows down from her. So I was the one that helped keep her head from hitting the other people and hitting the cement, and held her up.
Was this a training?
This was a training in a group of only teachers. There was nobody else than just the teachers in our district. And it was crazy because my background is in teaching Mandarin Chinese and theater in high school. I loved doing that. And we had this training on emergency preparedness, and we had a literal emergency from the slides. So when you have an experience like this, someone passes out, or someone is choking, or someone has a physical emergency, what have you been able to do to help that audience get the care they need and make sure that the event coordinators are able to see, hey, that person needs help, or something of that nature?
Well, thankfully, I haven't had that before. I did it when I used to be a paramedic instructor, and I had a student who you could tell physiologically that they were not looking right. And that's actually, ironically enough, because I was a medic. I'd been a medic. And there's when I looked at my patients, when I would bring them into the back of the rigs, you observe them. Yes, I have the BP. Yes, I have the EEG or EKG or whatever I'm using, whatever's going on, or if it's a respiratory issue, I'm watching them. But you monitor your patients. And I actually say this to young EMTs. I say, I don't care what the readings say on the sheet. You need to look at the person, because physiologically there are things going on with them that may not be observable through a machine. And so and actually, when I train EMTs recently, these are all kids who literally, Brigham, they don't know a world without social media. They literally do not know a world where that was not part of it. So when I explain to them, when I was a medic, we didn't have we didn't have a lot of the technology. We had EKGs, but we didn't have the tablets. We didn't have, instant access to these things. You're literally on a radio or on a phone in the ambulance talking to people. So here's what I tell people. If you are doing topics, particularly if you're doing a training that is going to be triggering, and that, and doesn't have to just be something that has excess of gore or something like that. But it could be a topic where it could be traumatizing for folks, is you need to do a few things. First, you need to do really good risk management, really good risk management. And what do I mean by that? I mean that in advance, you need to sit with the event coordinator and you need to say, I'm going to be talking about this and this. Is that going to be triggering for people? And so, like, I'll give an example. I spoke to a bunch of mobile home parks. This organization hired me to speak at 10 different sites, and in each site they had about 30 or 40, and actually one of them had 150 mobile home operators. And I was talking about, and I went to each one of them, and I'm sorry, I went to the event organizer and I said, you and I will be together for all 10 of these presentations. Um, is there any topics I have to be aware of or think about? And I said, I'm going to talk about wildfires. I'm going to talk about this. She goes, when you talk to the people who live in this area and who live in this area, you have to be careful talking about wildfires, because they are very triggered, because it was very traumatizing because of what happened in 2020, they had the August complex fire, which occurred in Northern California. It burned 1 million contiguous acres. It was called a gig fire. So what we're seeing in Los Angeles, certainly devastating. But for those of us who are emergency professionals, the gig fire was massive. I've never seen a fire like that before. But I'm going down to LA in about a week, so it'll be a different experience also. But one of the things I think is important is that you need to look at the audience, look at the region, and say, is what I am discussing, is that going to be triggering to this audience, for one reason or another? And that's important to be cognizant of that. The other thing is, I'm just going to say this, because I don't want to take up all our time on this, but that if you are talking about topics that are going to have visuals that are going to be triggering, then you need to be very aware of that. And you need to think about omitting it. And I talk about disasters. I never show gory pictures but if you're doing a training and you're training people, then here's what I think you should do. And I think you should do this in any case, in any presentation period, is you need to know your audience. You need to be looking at them in the eye and saying, how are these people reacting to me? Because you have a presentation you've delivered a dozen times, but you go in front of an audience and you're delivering it. It's very different with everybody. And there are some audiences that love you. There are some audiences that are lukewarm to you. And there are some that are going to be dead fish to you. And there's some that are going to be hostile to you. And so when you are speaking, you need to gauge who you are talking to. And if things are not working, think about omitting that stuff if you don't need it. If you're doing a training, what I actually do when I actually train to students, I actually do this. I go, hey guys, because I always teach the part about hazmat, the weapons of mass destruction, acts of terrorism. And so I say to them, hey guys, listen, there's going to be a couple of pictures in here that show a mass shooting, okay, that show the aftermath of a mass shooting. So we're going to take a break. We're going to come back. But I need you to fortify yourself. Take a few minutes, get yourself set up, because when we come in here, this is going to be different than talking about stroke victims or dealing with people with cardiac issues. This is something where there is a mass casualty incident. And so I give the students a few minutes, everybody calms down. And then I come in and say, everybody ready to go? Here we go. And then we go through it. And I find that they do better, because these are kids that are 18, 19 years old. They don't have a lot of maturity. They just have not been out in the world. Now, all of a sudden, I'm showing them pictures of a mass shooting. So, those are things I'm really cognizant of. And as presenters, we have to be careful who we're speaking to and what we're telling them.
That's a great way to pre-frame what you're going to be sharing with them, and making sure that you take away some of the challenges before they even pop up. Calming them down, saying, this is what you're going to expect. And I guess giving them the option to look. Sometimes they don't have the I would say the guts to be able to look at that. Some people get very queasy. And if you're going to be in the EMT field, you definitely would need to know this is a possibility. You have to have that. That's not
for it's them. Like I always tell them, I say, listen, it's going to be difficult the first time, but you do need to look. So I do say, and some say, I'm not really ready to look at this yet. And I'd say, okay, well then what we're going to do is we're going to take a short, as I said, we're going to take a short break, and then we'll come back. And then afterwards, like if there's some people that just said, I can't look at this right now, I just said, you know what, we'll look at it later. I do need you to look at it, but we don't need to look at this minute, because some people just takes time to acclimate them. But that doesn't usually happen, Brigham, and I'll tell you why. Because in advance, I will warn them. I'll say, hey guys, on December 5th, I'm going to be your guest speaker. That's actually a training position, right? So on December 5th, I'm going to be your guest trainer. And I'm always at the end of EMT training, because at the beginning they're learning about, how to work in a rig and how to to deal with the usual signs and symptoms and doing symptomology work and doing assessments. But I'm always at the end. But I always tell them, hey guys, on December 5th, be aware that we're taking a lot of things. There's going to be a lot of images that are going to be really difficult to watch. I never say blood and guts. I always just say there's a lot of images going to be difficult to watch, but are they important? And I actually go to the audience, and actually I would suggest for those of you who are hearing this, do this. Go to your audience, especially if you're training people, and say, we're going to look at difficult images on December 5th. Why are we doing that? Why would I force you to do that? And that, like, I get them, well, because we need to, because we're going to be in the field. So do you think it's possible that you could run across a mass casualty incident? And they'll say, oh, absolutely. Yeah, we get it. So I'll be like, so on December 5th, when we talk, just be aware of that. Be aware of the limitations if you're not used to seeing these things, or try to desensitize yourself in advance. Start to watch some of the images and really start to get yourself prepared, because on December 5th, you do have to look, and I have to see eyeballs on the screen, because I actually will be watching you to make sure you are watching the screen, not because I want to be the thought police, but because I have to train you, and I have to make sure that I'm not putting people out in the field who are not prepared for this, because I need to grade 8 it so that you're ready to go. And it helps. And by the time the students get there, they're usually mature enough, and they know. It's only every once in a while where they just go, I just couldn't do it. And we just say, okay, we're going to wait till next time, but we can't put you up for the test until you've actually watched this video in full and like eyeballs on the screen. And so, and that's what they do. And then they're better. Yeah. Because they know what they're getting into by going in this field. So.
Oh, totally. You have to be able to deal with some of those graphic imagery, because that's what you will be dealing with all the time,
right,
on a smaller scale most of the time. Let's talk about this. I know that sometimes people, when they are speaking, they will have things happen on stage, off stage. I come from a theater background, so there's been people that get hurt on stage, sprained ankles, blown out knees. Sometimes you don't land quite right. I had a friend that right before we went to China to perform, he was doing a backflip, landed on his elbow, and it swelled up to the sides. It looked like it was going to be like the size of a grapefruit, but it ended up being about the size of like a baseball. And it's terrifying, because he was like one of our lead guys. I was like, we have to get this figured out. And after talking with him, we were able to find out it wasn't broken, but it was a serious injury, and we needed to make sure we modified. So when you have injuries or you have issues that happen on stage or backstage, what are some of the tips or tricks that you've found to help fortify the speaker so that they can still deliver the message that needs to be delivered?
Well, with speakers, it's a little bit different. I was actually in West Side Story when I was a senior in high school, and I was also a martial. I was already a black belt by the time I was 18. So awesome. There was a fight scene. For those of you who've never been in West Side Story, never seen it before, in the middle of it, at the climax, which is just before the end of the first act, and so anyway, so they were, and so we actually had a professional, a guy who he worked for the University of California, Irvine. He's actually, I was looking him up. He actually is one of the top fight choreographers in the country. He clearly had started at UCI, and he built himself up, and he was in he did a lot of work for like Black Sails and some of these other big shows, and those the zombie movies and things. And anyway, so he asked us in the beginning, what are you used to doing? And I told him, I said, I was on a state demonstration team for martial arts. So I break boards, I've done flips. And back then I was small. I was 5'6", and I was a pretty small guy. And he said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you someone's going to flip you over their back. And I said, perfect. And so we actually did it every night. And every time it happened, the audience would gasp, because literally he's flipping me and I'm literally going almost vertical down, and I know how to slap on the floor because I'm so used to it, because I did fight choreography, and I'd be in simulate fights every week. And so the people are always worried about it, but I told them, I said, you know what, the way to handle this is to do really good risk management in advance. That's not the vocabulary I used then, but that's what I would use today with speakers. Is I would say, if you're doing something, because what's most likely to happen, and this has happened, I had a presenter one time who came up and they were using a knife in a presentation. I think you know where this is going. And the presenter was trying to talk about his experiences in some war or whatever. And what happened was he ended up cutting his hand. He cut his hand in the middle of the presentation. Like he had it, he was juggling the knife, and then the end of the serrated part of the knife just cut him like straight across. Oh. So now the way he handled it was, he said, we have to stop and this and that. And what I do is this actually, you know what? I'm going to tell you this story because this is even
Okay.
better. I was presenting and I was punching a glass. Okay. So I was punching the back of there was like a glass door. I was in like this conference room. It was a huge room. There's a lot of people in there, and I was punching the glass, and I punched it. The entire glass spidered. The whole glass had spidered. Like I just punched it and it spidered. And there was actually blood on my hands.
Oh no.
And I literally said, this is why we check the emergency exits in advance, so we know how strong the glass is, right? And people laughed about it. And afterwards, I actually took a picture, I put it online. So, because the reality is that these things happen in real life, but you know what the audience is going to look to you for? Maturity. Can you handle that and turn it into something else? So like when that happened, I laughed about it. I go, see, that's why we got to test the emergency exits in advance. And I kept going, and people asked me about my hand, and I said, we were asking me afterwards, but during the presentation, without saying anything, without asking anyone, I took one of the napkins off the table and I wrapped my hand up like that. And I kept talking. I didn't mention it. I didn't discuss it. I didn't say anything. I just ran the whole presentation like normal. I even pulled the glass pieces out while I was still talking. And I didn't say again, I didn't say anything. I didn't mention anything like that. But then at the end of it, I said, okay, I'm probably gonna have to clean my hand off. But I made a joke out of it because I have to like shake someone's hand. So I put my hand out and I took the napkin off and I was going to put my hand out, and the guy was like freaking out. And I just go, I guess probably I should use my left hand, So we made a joke out of it. That tells people that I am a mature enough presenter that I'm not going to hold off, and that I recognize that things happen. As a professional, everyone, you're not reciting Shakespeare. This is not Hamlet. Things are going to happen. And when they do, audience members are going to look to you to see how well does this person adapt? Is this person adapting to what's happening, or is that this person allowing the events to take over? So that's one of the things you really have to do. And with the person who had the cut hand, he stopped the presentation, like the guy who cut himself with a knife. He had to go off stage. The presentation essentially stopped for 25 minutes, and then they came back, and the security was there. There was blood on the floor. I mean, it was a mess. And I just said, it didn't have to be like that, but you have to adapt and think about it in advance so you know what to do. I could tell a dozen other stories, but that's one of the ways you can really do it, is show your adaptation, show that you know what's going on. You are in control of the audience, and you are in control of the presentation.
It's a great point. When I was in high school, I was in a performance where we had to open a bottle, and usually that bottle had been pre-opened, right?
Yep.
But at this final production, we did not have it pre-opened. And when I went to spin the bottle to open it, it ended up cutting my entire hand. And I didn't stop. I kept going. I did squeeze my hand and put it in my pocket to see if I could stop the bleeding. I went on with the scene. We got the entire scene done. And then after I got off stage, then I was able to take care of it in a way that didn't disrupt the performance. In theater, the show must go on. You hear that all the time. In speaking, it's the same thing. How do you respond to those challenges? They happen. They will happen. And I'm not saying they're going to happen all the time, but if we don't put in our mind that this could happen to you,
right,
then when it does, you won't be prepared. So I'm grateful we got to hear your story on that.
Well, no, and I definitely appreciate that. Yeah, because in the theater, it's also one of the things that they try and do is, in professional productions, they have understudies for everybody, right?
Yeah.
But even when I was in West Side Story, for example, because there's enough people, it's a major ensemble cast. It's large enough where I learned the part of one other person, so that if I couldn't do my, if they couldn't do their part. So I learned the part of the next larger character. I played Little John. That's not a huge character, but he does have some important things he has to do. But there's two other parts from the Jets. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, that's one of the gangs. And so I learned.
I played Riff, man. I love that story.
Oh, there you go. Good. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. Good. So anyway, but the point I'm making is that I knew their parts, they knew my part. So if something happens to me, they could do it. Here's the other thing. I wish we had more time to prepare, Brigham, because honestly, one of the things also I say to presenters all the time is I say, listen, if something's going wrong in the presentation, you need to adapt and change it. So, and on stage, I'm sure this has happened to you. This has happened to me on stage. Someone forgets their line and they say the wrong thing. And then instead, like I've seen actors, and that's what freaks. They just freak out because they don't know, because you didn't say the thing they need to say. Really mature actors will stand up and say, you mean this, right? You know what I mean? But they'll stay in characters. They're not saying it as Patrick. They're saying it as Little John.
Mm-hmm.
So they say, "You mean this? Isn't that right?" You know what I mean? And I use the same
Mm-hmm.
intonation. I still, because he's like a more of a diminutive character. So
Mm-hmm.
like I say in character, because sometimes I'll see actors do this. Like, you know, as I said, they'll get the affectation and then like their character is really quiet. But then in that moment, they'll go, "You mean this? Isn't that?" Because that's their natural personality. And you'll be like, "You're not you. You're still them." You know what I mean? And so speakers, it's the same way. I mean, if you're like a really happy speaker and that's your message, or you're a jokester, or you're a comedian, or you're, you know, whatever, you need to keep it exactly the way it's supposed to be, no matter what's going on. So if something happens to you, like this will happen. I've had a lectern fall over while I was speaking. I was speaking and the lectern fell over behind me. I was in Tampa, Florida at the Hilton, and I'm literally talking, and all of a sudden the whole audience starts like bolting up. And they saw the lectern slowly falling over because one of the AV people knocked it over while he was trying to put a water bottle on top, and he knocked the whole thing over, and everyone did this, and all of a sudden you hear this bang, and this thing hits the floor. Does that stop the presentation? Of course. I'm not going to act like it's not happening, but you know what I do? I incorporate it into the presentation. I go, "See, ladies and gentlemen, that's why we do emergency planning." You know what I mean? And then everybody laughs. They go, "He knows he's totally in control." Because I know we're going to run out of time here, but I wanted to say one thing. No matter what goes on, everybody, what Brigham and I have been talking to you about today is, and he's clearly an experienced actor. He's done a lot of things like I have. Is you need to communicate to the audience, because we can't talk about every possible scenario, but whatever you are doing, demonstrate to the audience that you are a professional and you are in control. If you lose control for 1 second, the audience will know it. And guess what? All that time you spent gaining their trust, you have lost it. And I'm not being funny about that. Like, that really is the case. Like, you'll lose them, and then that's the end. This is if you never even stood up, because now you look like a fool. So you need to stand up there, show you're a professional, and you're in control. Because what I do with speakers is I put them through a battery of things. That's how actually I do. When speakers hire me, I get hired by big keynoters sometimes who say, "Listen, something happened at this thing and I wasn't used to it." I say, "You know what? I'm going to put you through my gauntlet." I call it my gauntlet, and I actually go there, or I go there or whatever, and I actually stand there and I put them through the paces. I do things, and then we adapt each one. I say, "Here's some things to use." It's like canned responses sometimes if they're not really, you know how it is. Sometimes people are just not good at coming up with
off
stuff
the cuff stuff.
Yeah. So I just say, "We're going to can 3 or 4 things for you." And then they always feel comfortable. It's not perfect, but at least, you know what, then they're never caught totally flat footed. They have something to say, because, you know, mics will go out. Duh. PowerPoints go out. Duh, that happens. You know what I mean? Lecterns don't necessarily come crashing down, but things do happen, and I can the responses for them, and then it helps make it a joke. And it just helps them to get control back, because that's the goal I make with speakers. I say, I need to keep you in control. And keep you a professional no matter what's going on around you. That's not only my job as a disaster trainer, but it's my job is to make sure that people have that. So anyway, so we can talk about 100 of these things, because there's so many interesting things that happen on stage. You and I both know that. Tons of things can happen. So it's amazing.
In a world where anything can happen, the more prepared you are and staying in control, the better. Could you quickly brush over, let us know exactly what is your framework? I know you've got 3 main points to this. Tell us like the 2-minute version of how you came up with this framework, why it's so important to help you stay in control.
Well, the framework that I use in disasters, generally speaking, I've called it the C3 method, which is command, communicate, and carry out. And and really, people say, "Well, what's that all about?" Well, I say, essentially, it's an answer to a critical question: who is in control in a disaster? And the answer is you. And the method allows you to do that, because the assumption most people make, and presenters make this all the time, and we just talked about this 30 seconds ago, is if something happens, you have 2 choices. You can assume that no one is going to do anything, or you assume someone else is going to do something. The problem is, if you assume someone else is going to do something, what happens is, from a practical perspective on stage, people start to look around, they wait for the moderator to take control. And you know how it is. Sometimes you have good MCs, sometimes you have bad MCs, and sometimes you have really bad MCs who are not used to dealing with these things. So what I say is I say, whenever something happens on stage, I want you to assume that if you do nothing, no one else will do anything either. If you do nothing, nothing is going to happen. So what I tell people to do is, You need to take command of what's happening. And by command, I mean take leadership. Just like, I mean, I'm sure a lot of you who are listening to this, you talk about leadership. I talk about it in sales. I'm just saying, like, if you're people talk about, in sales or marketing. I had a sales presenter who goes, yeah, so this and this and this, and they go, I'm always in control in sales. And then something will happen and they'll freak out. And I'll be like, you just lost credibility with these people because they know that you're just acting, in a sense, right? Like you were just making that up. So what I say is you take command of it, meaning you assume that if you do nothing, no one else is going to do anything either. You'd be amazed how much that changes your mindset, because now you say, I have to handle this situation. I have to take control of the audience. Communication is just that. You're communicating with your audience, and that doesn't mean actually necessarily audio communication. Can be body language communication as well. If your mic goes out and you're in front of, I've done this before. I've had this happen before. It happens all the time. For those of us who go on stages all over the world, this happens. You're speaking in a country, they're paying you X amount of dollars, and there's 1,500 people in the room, and your mic goes out. Now, can you just start talking? No, you can't, but there's some fun body language things that you can do that lets the audience knows you're figuring it out, you're getting it done, it's all in control. Again, you've taken command of the situation, and then carry out is simply doing it. That's what I tell people. Just start doing things. Don't get paralyzed, because that happens all the time. Speakers get paralyzed. Speakers who actually Brigham, I've seen some really talented speakers, people who get paid a lot of money to speak, more money than me, and they stand up, and then when things start to happen, they freeze up because they're so used to narrating their keynote a certain way. They're so used to doing it a certain way. They're so used to talking to certain kinds of audiences that when things start to mess up, they don't know what to do. They're a complete mess. And so that's why I tell people all the time, focus, figure out what you're trying to do, and then execute. If you do those things, then you've taken command of the situation, you've communicated what needs to be done, and then you've gotten things done. That is how you take control in any disaster, whether you're dealing with the LA wildfires, whether you're dealing with a Category 5 hurricane, or if there is a lecture, or if there's a lectern that's bearing down on you and it's crashing off of a stage. No matter what you're dealing with, ensuring that you are in control at all times, that is how you maximize the experience and do true disaster preparedness while you are on the stage.
Wonderful. Patrick, that was a great summation to our conversation. Wonderful insights on how we can be more prepared and be disaster-proof speakers. Any final things that you had as far as an idea that you wanted to share that I didn't ask you about?
Well, one of the things I tell all of my speakers is this, and I want to go back to part of our conversation we talked about earlier, because I think that I noticed that Toastmasters International now no longer does this. I don't know if they've incorporated this in other presentations, but from what I've heard from people, they're no longer doing it. But I say this to audiences I say this to speakers all the time. I want you to do a drill. No matter what you do, I want you to do a drill in a sense. And they say, well, what do you mean? What kind of a drill? I say, I want you to get in front of an audience of 30 people, not 20, not 15, not 10, 30 or more. And I want you to tell them to be hostile to you. Whatever you're talking about throughout your presentation, I want you to talk for, do your 20-minute talk or your 40-minute talk. You don't have to do the whole thing, but just do a segment, at least 20 minutes of your presentation, and have a short Q&A, okay? And tell the audience in advance, way in advance, do you want them to be hostile? Because I do that with presenters. That's a way I test them, and I act as the hostile audiences, and I throw at them every possible thing, because what you and I were talking about earlier about hecklers and things, that's just one element of a hostile audience. I've seen audiences challenge speakers before. I have seen audiences who will take 2 or 3 people in a clique, and they will basically start saying, you're wrong with this, and how do you explain this, and how do you explain that, as if it's like a Judge Judy episode or something, where people are getting a back, and the speaker, because I've seen speakers who are really good and don't keep their composure because they love their subject so much. Just like I love disaster preparedness. I know it sounds weird to say I love disaster preparedness. I do love disaster as much as I love speaking, and I love disaster preparedness. And when people do that, though, I've learned this a long time ago. You don't lose your cool. Just like when I was in high school, college competing, you don't, because the professors are there to do that. They do it intentionally. It's meant to do that. And so when I see adults who have never been through that kind of a crucible, you need to go through what I sort of term sort of the crucible of fire. You have to actually be up there and have an audience that is hostile to you, because then what'll happen is it'll break the sensation and you're trained to deal with it. Because then anything that happens, a lectern falling down, a mic going out, that's nothing compared to having 30 people and an audience member who are yelling at you and challenging you and telling you you're wrong. There's nothing that's harder than that. So that's why I tell every speaker. So for those of you who are on here, think of this as like, I'm your disaster planner and this is your assignment. This is your disaster drill. I want you to take 30 people, again, not 20, not 25, 30. And there's a reason for 30. It's a visual reason. We don't have time today to talk about it, but there's a reason why 30 or more makes a difference. And I want you to take them and ask them in advance to be hostile to you. Do 20 minutes of your talk, again, not 15, not 10 minutes, 20 minutes of your talk, and then 10 minutes of Q&A. And that 30 minutes, you will learn a ton. You will learn so much about yourself, about how you're going to deal with these situations, because that is really what makes a good speaker and gives them the fortitude that they need to operate in any environment. Brigham, I mean, no matter what happens to you, whether you're, you fall, you hurt your elbow and it's like, it's growing into a grapefruit, or, you have audience members who are yelling at you because of Hurricane Katrina, whatever, you've now put yourself through the paces, and then you're better prepared, because now all of a sudden the audiences seem so happy and nice. And to be able to have a predetermined audience who can actually help you afterwards. But for those of you who are doing this, get a trainer. You don't have to hire me or anything. Just get a trainer who will sit there and afterwards say, here's how you handle that, and get audience feedback too. So you should get an expert trainer to talk with you, talk you through it, and then get the audience to do the same. And then you'd be amazed at how much you would grow as a speaker in just 30 minutes. It's amazing how much I've seen that with speakers. You do that, I put them through that kind of thing, and then afterwards they're so much better. So that's one of the things I would tell everyone here. So if you didn't listen to anything else I said today, put yourself through that drill, and then no matter what happens on stage, you're always going to be prepared for it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Patrick. That's an excellent call to action. Go and do it, guys. I want to do it. I think that's amazing. And I'm very thankful for the insight that you brought, the preparation, absolutely amazing experiences, and some fun stories too. So I hope this is something you come back to over and over. And guys, I hope that you find not just value in this, but you take action on the things that we're bringing up, and you can be more prepared so that when those lecterns fall over, when the challenges happen, you'll be able to use that prior planning that prevents present problems. That's one of my favorite 5 Ps. So thank you so much, Patrick. Where can people find you online so that they can keep that conversation and preparation going?
Yeah, I'm at disasterpatrick.com. Again, Disaster Patrick and Brigham. In fact, what I'm going to do is later this year, I'm actually doing a series of short videos, which I will do on YouTube, of how to handle these types of situations. So actually, I have an audience. They're a paid audience that I've used before, and I'm actually gonna simulate these things because I want to show speakers, here is how you deal with all that. So for those of you who are interested, and if you want to contact me, as I said, disasterpatrick.com, I would love to speak with you. Either do the contact on there. My phone number is also on there. I would love to be able to speak with you and work with you, because my whole purpose is to help prepare speakers for anything. So, and those videos are going to be so amazing. And when they happen, I will send them to you. Please share them with your audience. I just think that they'll get so much out of them, because I'll literally say, here's how you handle this stuff. Here's what you have to deal with. So that if they're busy and doing other things, they go, okay, at least I have some strategies now, because that's the whole purpose, is to prepare you for things so you can always take command, you can always communicate and get things carried out and move along as a really successful speaker. So thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it very much, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. I really appreciate coming on the podcast today. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Patrick. Have a wonderful rest of your day, guys. God bless, and we'll see you next time.